Europe calls for the compulsory resettlement of 160,000 refugees. The benefits of iron for pregnant women. And Apple unveils a new iThing that may have you saying, "I want." Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. The trek for migrants crossing Europe heading for Germany is testing the strength, resolve and will of tens of thousands of people that are so desperately seeking a better life. Thursday, hundreds, possibly thousands of migrants endured a steady downpour before encountering Macedonian riot police aggression at the Greek-Macedonian border. Well, after some loud, lengthy and testy face-to-face discussions, at least one police officer started hitting some of the migrants with police baton. Soon, the scene became more chaotic as women and children began crying as they retreated to avoid further abuse by the police before being commanded to sit down. A train later pulled up outside the area where the migrants were huddled, but it's unknown if any of the migrants boarded the train. Now, meanwhile, European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker has called for the resettlement of 160,000 refugees across the 28 members of the European Union and a permanent asylum mechanism to cope with the future crisis. Henry Ridgwell reports from London on the latest attempt by Brussels to deal with a massive influx of migrants and refugees.
Even as European lawmakers gathered in Brussels, the flow of refugees onto Europe's shores continued. 2,500 migrants were taken from Greek islands to the mainland Wednesday. The total number of arrivals is approaching 500,000. In an emotive State of the Union address, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said it was time for Europe to rally.
The numbers are impressive. For some, they are frightening. But now is not a time to take fright. It is a time for bold, determined, concerted action by the European Union, by its member states and by its institutions.
Greece, along with Italy and Hungary, says it is overwhelmed by the number of new arrivals.
We are proposing a second emergency mechanism to relocate a further 120,000 people from Italy, Greece and Hungary. This has to be done in a compulsory way.
Juncker went on to announce measures to try to combat the causes of the refugee crisis.
An emergency trust fund, starting with 1.8 billion euros from our common EU financial means to address the crisis in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions, the Horn of Africa and the North of Africa. We want to help create lasting stability.
Horrific images of drowned migrants have sparked Europe into action. The EU must act to prevent refugees having to take such risks, says Amnesty International.
For the whole of Europe, we're saying roughly 300,000 at least of resettlement places. Also other forms of routes, humanitarian visas, for example, more places for family reunification.
Amnesty says the entire structure of Europe's asylum process needs rebuilding.
We need to get rid of this notion that only the border countries are responsible for processing and dealing with refugees. And a very important proposal that we have is that we need to see freedom of movement of people once they have been found to be refugees.
The redistribution of some refugees has already begun. These Iraqi and Syrian nationals were transferred from Germany to France Wednesday. But Britain and many Eastern European countries have rejected the idea of compulsory quotas of refugees. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the Obama administration is committed to increasing the number of refugees America can take and is looking hard at the number the country could manage. He commented after meeting with lawmakers on Wednesday to discuss the proposed refugee plan for the next fiscal year and the burgeoning refugee crisis in Europe and Syria. VOA's Pam Dawkins has the story.
As Syrians and other refugees pour into Europe, the U.S. is considering how to step up its response to the growing humanitarian crisis. Everyone understands a sense of urgency and importance, says State Department spokesman John Kirby.
It's impossible to look at the images, all of them, whether they're still photos or video, and not be moved by what's going on right now.
The State Department says Secretary Kerry has proposed increasing the number of refugees that can be admitted to the U.S. above the current ceiling of 70,000. The U.S. response has not remotely kept pace with the refugee crisis in Europe and the Middle East, says Kathleen Newland, who spoke via Skype.
So if we were to up our number to, say, 100,000 a year altogether, we could easily accommodate 35 or 40,000 Syrians.
The United Nations wants the U.S. and other Western nations to take in 130,000 Syrians by the end of next year. The U.S. has already contributed a total of over $4 billion in humanitarian aid to help Syrians affected by the country's civil war and committed to raising the number of Syrians settled in the U.S. to 1,800 by the end of the month. But it is the Obama administration's foot-dragging in Syria's civil unrest that has helped spark the refugee crisis, claimed Senator John McCain.
This crisis didn't come out of nowhere, like an earthquake or a tornado. Instead, it's the predictable result of this administration's policies of leading from behind.
Another Republican and presidential candidate says the U.S. should take its fair share of refugees and do more to help Syrians.
If I'm president, it's not about accepting refugees. It's about destroying the reason they leave. It's about sending them back to Syria with hope.
The U.S. is considering a range of ways to help refugees. The State Department says a primary goal is to create a climate that will allow the Syrian refugees to return home. Pam Dawkins, VOA News, the State Department.
On to Africa now. Grenade attacks in Central African Republic capital killed at least 2 people late on Wednesday in a rare incident of violence in Bangui. The United Nations and residents both say men on motorbikes tossed grenades into crowds gathered in 3 different places in southern Bangui during the evening. Now, a civil war in the Central African Republic has had serious consequences on the children there. According to a new report by the organization Watchlist on Children and Armed Conflict, armed groups in the CAR have attacked schools, students and teachers. The armed groups and international peacekeeping forces have used schools as bases for their activities. Now, for more details on the report, Janine Mona of a researcher with Watchlist joins me from our UN studio in New York. Janine, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, here's the question. You have spoken to quite a number of people in preparing this report. How widespread did you establish this problem is in CAR?
Well, a recent education cluster assessment was taken in April 2015 of this year, and they found that about 29.6% of the schools have been attacked over the course of the recent conflict, and about 8.4% have been used by armed groups and, on occasion, international peacekeeping forces as well for their operations.
Now, what are some of the stories that you got out of this research, some of the atrocities that have been committed in those schools?
Well, there are a number of ways in which schools have been affected. I think first and foremost, schools have been looted very, very severely. Sometimes armed groups will come into schools and strip them completely bare. They'll take the desks, the chairs, the roofs, the doors. And this really, I think, requires a lot of rehabilitation at the moment. Another way in which schools have been affected is that a lot of teachers and students now live in very close proximity to armed groups and international forces. And oftentimes, when students and teachers are coming to and from school, it results in a situation where they're threatened by armed groups. And sometimes armed groups interfere directly with the way in which a school operates. So perhaps an example example for you is we visited a school in Kagabandoro in northern Central African Republic, and a school director there had built some ditches across a playground to prevent members from the ex-Seleka armed group who lived near the school driving across the school playground. And when one of the commanders saw this, he entered the classroom with a machete and threatened to decapitate the teacher in front of his students. So there are also those kinds of cases as well.
Now,
the third and primary way in which...
Go ahead.
Oh, and I guess the third and primary way in which schools have been affected is armed groups have also used the schools as a base for their lodging or for a number of their operations, meetings, things like that. And international peacekeepers, in having to stabilize some of the areas, have also had to use these facilities
now,
for their logistics.
Very quickly, given that all sides have used these schools, is this a common practice in that country or other conflict areas, or is this a unique case in the CR?
No, attacks on schools and military use of schools is actually quite prevalent in a number of conflict countries. And we're trying to just highlight the implications of this particular practice on the difficulties it makes children who need to go to school access education. And education is a very important part of countries' transition to peace. But it is actually a widespread practice that has been documented in a number of other different countries and conflict contexts like Syria, Nigeria, the DRC, a lot of other countries.
Well, thank you very much. We really hope that somebody will take care of these kids. Janine Mona, a researcher with Watch List on Children and Armed Conflict, joining us live from our UN studio in New York. Now, South Sudanese Foreign Minister Barnaba Mariel Benjamin says his country and its neighbor Sudan have a moral responsibility to ensure peace and prosperity in that region. Mr. Benjamin spoke in Moscow during trilateral talks with Sudan's Foreign Minister and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Russia says it hopes talks between Sudan and South Sudan foreign ministers taking place on Thursday will be fruitful. South Sudan seceded from Sudan and declared independence after a referendum in 2011. Both Juba and Khartoum have accused each other of breaking peace agreements. Well, the recent South Sudan peace deal signed between the government and the opposition has now been ratified by both sides. So what does this all mean for the South Sudanese at home and abroad? John Tanza, managing editor and host of VOA's South Sudan in Focus radio program, has been talking to a cross-section of leaders and citizens of South Sudan, and now joins me to tell us all about that. Now, John, you know, yes, everybody's kind of been excited about the signing, finally, of the deal, but then there was the ratifying.
Yes.
Briefly, can you clarify what that means, the two sides ratifying this?
The two sides are supposed to endorse it. In Parliament for Juba, the parliamentarians, the lawmakers in South Sudan, are supposed to ratify the agreement, and they did that today. Once the agreement is ratified by members of parliament in South Sudan, it becomes a law. And then on the sides of the rebels loyal to Dr. Riek Machar, they also ratified the agreement today in Pagak, which is the headquarters in Upper Nile State. And so now the two sides will treat this document as a law.
Okay. Now, what is it that is supposed to follow quickly?
After the ratification,
exactly, yes,
there is supposed to be a workshop for security arrangement in the transitional period. Now, this workshop was supposed to have taken place on the 5th of this month, but it could not take place because the agreement was not ratified. So this workshop is going to take place on Saturday this week, and after the workshop, there will be the formation of the joint monitoring team to see the monitoring of the ceasefire agreement.
Tell us a little about what people's reactions have been, given that they've waited for such a long time.
Well, the reaction of the people is still the same. They want an end to the conflict. Right after Dr. Riek Machar signed the agreement in Addis Ababa on the 17th of August and President Kiir signed on the 26th of August, the two warring parties have been fighting each other heavily in Upper Nile State. And depending on who you talk to, they will blame always the other side. The rebels will say, it's the government who attacked us, we are just acting in self-defense. The government will also say the same. But the reality on the ground is that these two forces are fighting to gain grounds that they could use as a bargaining chip in the future negotiations.
Talk about bargaining chip. Both sides tend to say that they were literally forced into signing this peace deal. What are some of those issues that are kind of uncomfortable in that agreement that could perhaps resurface?
Power sharing. Power sharing is a big deal for the two sides. The agreement says that President Kiir will remain the president of the country, and rebel leader Riek Machar will be the first vice president. But this is in the backdrop of a situation where you have a vice president in the country, that's James Waniga. So President Kiir, rebel leader Riek Machar, and James Waniga sitting under the same roof will be a big, hurdle for them to overcome. And the other issue is wealth sharing. Oil is found in Upper Nile and Jonglei State and Unity State. And these states, the rebels have quite a chunk of power sharing in terms of ministerial portfolios in these states. So that still is a problem.
And everybody wants the fat part of the cow, right?
Of course, the oil is where everybody is looking at.
Question, these men and women had been sitting for months upon months in Addis Ababa. You would have thought that they came to an agreement, and therefore this deal was supposed to represent things that they had agreed on. Why is it that they both seem to insist that they were just forced to sign it?
Because none of their aspirations were in the power sharing
So who
deal.
put them in that deal?
The IGAD plus countries, the international community plus regional leaders felt that the suffering of the people of South Sudan is going on unabated. And so there was a need for an end to this conflict, because during these 18 months, each of the two groups are just talking about the same thing every day.
Yeah.
The rebels will say, we want the position of the prime minister. The government will say, no, we cannot give you the position of a prime minister. It's not in the constitution. We'll give you the position of a vice president. The rebels will say, no, we cannot take the position of vice president. We want first vice president. And so they were just arguing on the same thing for months and months and months.
Yes. Now, given the history of this country and what citizens have witnessed, do you get a sense that they are hopeful that this deal will be implemented and restore peace in South Sudan?
It's a $1 million question, because as it is now, the two sides have not owned the peace agreement. They are calling it forced deal.
Yeah.
They have not owned it. And since the ownership is not with the two sides, their supporters are likely to behave the same. And so the future of this agreement is hanging in balance. But the good news is, at the end of it, if they go until the end of the transitional period, which is around November, there should be elections. And if the people of South Sudan are given the chance to go and have a credible election, maybe you will get a solution to this problem.
You know, we just hope so.
Let's
because the
hope so,
people of South
Vincent.
Sudan have suffered a great deal. John, thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
insights.
Pleasure to be here.
John Tanzer is a managing editor and host of VOA South Sudan In Focus radio program. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54. Check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. I want to hear from you. Now, coming up, the health benefits of iron for pregnant women. Stay with us.
From science and technology, here's What's New.
What's new? A state-of-the-art simulator that uses gaming technology to simulate various driving situations. Australian researchers designed what looks like a large exercise machine with a steering wheel surrounded by huge video walls. The video walls show various traffic frustrations, including tailgaters, roadworks, and rude, abusive motorists. It's designed to test road rage. Here's researcher Paul Turner.
All of us have been oblivious and distracted, and occasionally probably even aggressive when we didn't need to be. What this study will be about is giving us some lessons as to what makes us act that way, why do we act the way we do when we're driving, and then what can we do about it.
And our road rage personalities are not good for our health, says fellow researcher Bertie Scott Parker.
And we know that increased levels of stress can have really bad health outcomes like heart disease, problems associated with cancer and diabetes.
For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Groshans.
Welcome back. It's time for our Thursday Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 Health correspondent Lino Mudu with a look at iron and pregnant women. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Vincent. Well, new research shows iron supplements are good for pregnant women. The research led by scientists at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine was conducted in Kenya and looked at 470 pregnant women. 60% of the women were anemic at the beginning. They say extra iron given to half of those women increased the duration of their pregnancies and the weight of their newborns. In addition, resulted in no significant differences in overall maternal malaria infection risk. The study was published in the Journal of American Medical Association. A United Nations interagency group says global mortality rates for children under 5 has fallen by more than 50% since 1990. That year, 12.7 million children under 5 died from largely preventable diseases, as opposed to the UN says 5.9 million in 2015. This is the first year the figure has gone below the 6 million mark. Levels and Trends in Child Mortality Report 2015, released by partner agencies including UNICEF and the World Bank Group, indicate that although the global progress has been substantial, well, 16,000 children under 5 still die every day. Children are most at risk during the first month of life, when 45% of all under 5 deaths happen. Despite the huge success, the group's report says most countries still missed the MDG target of reducing child mortality by 2/3. Now, outdoor air pollution kills 3.7 million people per year worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. The key to controlling the problem is knowing where it comes from, but that information is all but absent in much of the developing world. So the United Nations Environment Programme is launching a low-cost tool to help officials keep watch over the air in their cities. VOA's Steve Baragona has more from Nairobi, Kenya.
Tabitha Wangeshi suffers from asthma, but with the little money she makes selling charcoal, she can't always afford the medicine to treat it.
My chest is always blocked, like my ribs are dried up. From there, I start breathing heavily. I run out of oxygen, then I start breathing heavily.
Across town at Kenyatta National Hospital, Dr. Ndambuki Mboloi says there is one factor causing breathing problems all over Nairobi.
Air pollution is a big problem within the city.
The city's dirty vehicles and notorious traffic are the leading source of dangerous gases and particles in the air. Mboloi says the toxic haze that shrouds Nairobi raises rates of asthma, heart disease, lung disease, and airway infections.
By judging with the number of patients that we see who present with the respiratory problems, it may be getting worse.
So all over the developing world, cities are growing fast, and with them, the traffic, and with the traffic, the pollution. And we know it's bad, but we don't know how bad it is because no one's been checking.
Experts say there is very little data on air pollution and its consequences in the cities of Africa, or much of the developing world. But the UN Environment Programme hopes to change that with this little box.
The technology that we are launching today is a way to measure that very accurately and very cheaply.
These little boxes measure all the major air pollutants for about 100 times less than the typical monitor. McGlade says cities can build an effective network of monitors at a price they can afford.
And they're able then to do the apportionment to find out the source of the pollution and then act on that.
So policies can target a city's biggest problems, whether it's burning trash or industrial pollution or emissions from dirty vehicles. And the world's rapidly growing cities can have the information they need to control pollution that each year kills millions and harms millions more. Steve Baragona, VOA News, Nairobi.
And that's our Africa 54 Health Report for today. Vincent?
Well, Lino, thanks a lot. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, tech giant Apple unveils what the company hopes will be 2015's must-have gadget. We'll be right back.
It's a creature that looks like
Ich wollte schon immer einen Award für Jugendlichen machen. Ich wollte schon immer Jugendlichen zelebrieren und feiern, weil wir arbeiten mit ihnen, sagen wir, wir sollen aktiv werden. Wir müssen es aber anerkennen. Wir müssen das aber dann
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. America prepares to say goodbye to a beloved institution. On Saturday, September 19th, Spanish-language channel Onevisión will broadcast the last episode of the legendary show Sábado Gigante Internacional, or Gigantic Saturday Night, which the Guinness Book of World Records satisfies as the longest-running variety show in the United States. On Tuesday, the show's beloved 74-year-old host Dan Francisco was celebrated twice. First, a street in the Washington Heights section of New York was officially named Don Francisco Boulevard. Later, he attended a red carpet event in his honor. Sábado Gigante has been on air for 53 years. Well, next up, tech giant Apple on Wednesday announced a bigger iPad with a new keyboard and stylus aimed at business customers, which will be priced starting $799. Apple chief Tim Cook says the iPod Pro performs similar to a desktop computer. Apple showed off a smart keyboard and a stylus called Pencil. Apple says it had partnered with Cisco Systems and IBM to help power the iPad Pro, which it says is almost 2 times faster than a regular iPad and has a 10-hour battery life. Well, and finally, makeup lovers rejoice. A new app called Try It On enables users to test cosmetics virtually. That could just revolutionize the way women purchase cosmetics. The app allows you to snap a selfie and then scan the barcodes of makeup products in just 2 seconds. It shows you how the product looks on you. Try It On works with 12 cosmetic brands sold in drugstores, including Revlon, L'Oreal, and CoverGirl. And it works with nail polishes, too. The app also features coupons for products and lets users upload images to Facebook and Instagram to get a second opinion. That is what is trending today. And that's our show for today. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words.
This word comes from a story about negotiations and Iran's nuclear program.
There would be 6 months of negotiations on more extensive limits on Iran's nuclear program and potentially an end to the devastating sanctions. Iran says it does not want to build a nuclear bomb, but the UN Security Council wants agreed limits and strict verification.
The word verification means to confirm something, to make sure it is true.
In this story, the United Nations wants to confirm that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Inspectors could provide verification about Iran's nuclear programs.
Now, the next time you hear verification, you will know what this news word means.